Happy to have you all with us today. My name is Ken Levinson, the Executive Director of the Passive House Network. Today for this event on Passive House DEI, PHN DEI, connecting underserved communities with sustainability opportunities. And really happy to have Daphany Rose Sanchez here with us today, the Executive Director of Kinetic Communities Consulting. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple of brief notes. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Passive House Network, we're a national nonprofit affiliated with the Passive House Institute and the International Passive House Association. We have members across the country, along with regional chapters, and we work with allies across the country and Passive House groups around the world as part of the global effort to fight climate change and make buildings a core part of sustainability solutions across the board. We work with the North American Passive House Certifiers Circle, and who certify buildings. There are over 30 certifiers working on projects across the US and Canada, and are a font of knowledge for everyone to take advantage of. We are essentially a capacity building organization, connecting people, peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, doing training for the Certified Passive House Designer course, supporting the Certified Passive House Tradesperson course, and working towards more certified buildings, educating stakeholders across the industry. We hope that you'll join us going forward to other events, become a member, take part. We have several events upcoming I want to briefly mention. On May 18th, we're going to have a case study on the pH ribbon and embodied carbon calculations with Passive House. It's a single family home, and it should be a very interesting a session, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of total building carbon emissions. There are Certified Passive House Designer courses starting up for the summer season, Midwest/Mountain region, a big hybrid regional region, if you will, the South and California. We expect to be in the Pacific Northwest later in the year. International Passive House Open Days are happening June 23rd through the 25th. We are just onboarding projects now. There are projects will be open across the country and around the world. It's a great way to find out about Passive House. Generally speaking, when somebody steps into a Passive House and experiences it for the first time, it becomes obvious why this is such an important strategy and to build with. And then finally, I want to note that we have our national conference happening in this fall, in person in Denver, Colorado on the 4th and 5th of October, as well as online. And on September 28th, the week before, we'll have an all online portion of that conference. So it will be accessible from anywhere, but we hope you do join us in Denver, as we'll be doing great project tours in the area and much else. So with that, I am very happy to and honored to bring this to introduce this session. PHN DEI is a recurring event that we want to showcase real-world efforts to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion using case study framing. The goal is to offer real-world takeaways and inspiration for you, our attendees, to act on and make DEI an everyday priority in our Passive House, our sustainability work generally, and our whole life efforts. We encourage you to submit questions in the chat here today, which the moderators may draw from. And further, we encourage you to share your DEI stories with us by filling out this online form. You can also email your story to dei@passivehousenetwork.org. Today, we're talking with Daphany Rose Sanchez, and she has made a career of seeing these interconnections between better buildings, sustainability, and social justice. Today, Daphny leads the company Kinetic Communities Consulting, whose mission is to work with energy and affordable housing industry partners to connect, educate, and simplify energy efficiency opportunities for underrepresented communities. So we're really happy to have you here with us today, Daphny. And our moderators for this conversation today are Sid Tiendra-Biego, who's a student at New York Tech, and she's a president of a NOMA chapter there, and Eddie Voltaire, who's a sustainability professional and a PHN board of director. So welcome to you all three and to everybody, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. And just one final check-in before I hand it over to you, Eddie, Sid, and Daphny. Eddie, do we have video or no?
Can you hear me, Ken?
Yep.
Okay, not quite yet.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on with the computer.
Well, let's imagine.
Yeah, let's imagine that I'm here and you guys have a visualization of me. I'm working on it on my end, though.
All right, well, I'm handing it off to you.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Ken. So Daphny, Sid, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. How is everyone on a Thursday afternoon here in New York?
Same here.
Not too bad, not too bad. Just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So we'll jump right into it. Daphny, you are quite the busy individual. I wanted to start off by asking you to tell us your background for those that are not familiar with you and the work that you do. How did you get involved in sustainability? What brought you to this point?
Yeah, so that's always such a fun question. So I am a born and bred native New Yorker. So I was raised in New York, born in New York, most likely gonna die in Brooklyn. And so my relationship with the work has been purely based off of the experiences that I've had throughout my life. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn Hospital in the borough of Brooklyn. And I was raised in a New York City Housing Authority, which is also known as, public housing developments, or colloquially known as the projects. And so being raised in public housing, one thing that I didn't really understand when I was younger was the relationship of people with housing. And so I went to some zone schools, public schools, where I had teachers when I was in middle school tell me like, oh, you're Puerto Rican from the projects, you're going to probably wind up dropping out. And I never really understood that. I was like, why are you getting so aggressive and abrasive with me just because of where I live? Like, you don't know anything about me. You just knew, that I lived in this like infrastructure that happened to have a negative connotation. And so as I continued to grow up, I started understanding more that there is this negative stigma with public housing, and there's this negative stigma with people that live there, without folks actually understanding the reason why it exists, right? And how government created it, utilizing something called eminent domain and taking, homes from Black and brown people, and how they disinvested once public housing was developed, and have created these intentional systematic designs to prevent people from growing from one generation to the next. So it got me, I went through an angry phase when I was an undergrad. And at the same time, my parents had purchased a home in Staten Island. So they left Brooklyn and we were so angry about it. And less than a year of them purchasing that home, it got completely demolished by Hurricane Sandy. And it was a very jarring experience. We were in the home when Hurricane Sandy hit. We were rescued by boat. And I took a couple of weeks and a couple of months to reflect on like, we're never gonna have it easy, I would say. Like we went from public housing and it was a bad situation that we, did, supposedly the quote unquote American dream and got a house, and it was also a bad situation. So, why should I even bother doing anything? after, I was in my feelings for a little while, very drastically so, because I felt so overwhelmed after such a bad natural disaster. I started looking up some of the information about my parents' home. And I found out that my parents' home was 5 feet below the sea level, the recommended sea level and where you're supposed to do construction. So it was already under the sea line level. Not only that, I also saw that my parents were only able to purchase a home in an area that was previously redlined. So a red line community is a community where the federal government said you cannot lend in this area because there are Black folks and Puerto Rican folks and other folks that are not white. And so it was a moment of frustration to see that once again, something that we had no control over, something that was designed before I was even born, had a direct impact on my life and had a direct impact on my family's life. So I think that was a moment, seeing death within my within like feet of my eyes, that I was like, wait a minute, this is not okay. And like, I don't want to as a born and bred New Yorker, I don't want other New Yorkers to experience this. I don't want other people to have the trauma of climate disasters and environmental degradation that is so intertwined with housing be their lived experiences. So after those experiences was when I did a full deep dive into sustainability and efficiency and really advocating for housing as a human right and ensuring that within that it's the sustainable practices, it's passive house practices, it's workforce opportunities for communities that live in these areas, and really changing that narrative of housing is a place where you build culture and you build tradition, and it doesn't have to be it should not be a place that you remember having asthma attacks. It should not be a place where you remember experiencing natural disasters or being next to a toxic spill. It should be a good memory, and it shouldn't be interfered or interjected just because of the color of your skin. And so that's how I got onto this workspace. And I always tell folks, for me, climate action is more like people action. How do we ensure communities and communities of color and low-income populations can have a safe place to live? And as a result of a safe place to live, then we can solve climate for everybody else.
Daphne, that makes me think about positionality and how we approach design. Your unique experience has given you this inspiration and move you in this direction, how you choose to go about your work. But I also think that is something that a lot of people do not share. What would you suggest to those who are working in this space that doesn't have your positionality, your understanding of the community as far as best practice for engaging communities to understand what's actually happening on the ground? I think there's a huge difference between what actually takes place and this constructed reality that people engage with when they're looking at minority communities or disadvantaged communities, and they don't understand the historical context in which the situation on the ground has created.
Yeah, I think those are great questions. The one thing that we tell folks is a lot of time as we're trying to tackle climate, we're trying to make everything, net zero, we want to solve for 2050. We often think about what is the biggest, scalable, fastest thing we can do. And often that loses sight of those lived experiences. It loses sight of solutions that have already been presented within communities, within neighborhoods. And then it just focuses the unintended consequences on those communities and on those lived experiences. So one thing we always recommend folks to do if they're working on projects is look at Rosa Gonzalez's spectrum of community engagement. So how do you shift your work from information sharing, saying, hey, this is what's happening. You like it, you don't like it, like this is what's best for everybody, to actual power shifting, right? And so what does power shifting look like? It looks like actually having live partnerships, paid partnerships with community experts. It looks like hiring community experts, not only for their labor, because that is just one aspect, but actually for the strategic, for the designing, for the engineering, for the architectural, because they'll be able to present you with that lived experience, and they'll be able to present you with some of those insights that are necessary in making that adaptation. And sometimes you don't need to create something new. Sometimes the community has already have a solution for how to adapt to an extreme heat situation, right? Or adapt to a cloudburst event. And they'll be able to present that in those conversations that you have, in those partnerships. And you can only do that if you're coming in willing to say, like, yes, I acknowledge, like, I have learned X in engineering school or in architectural school, but I don't know anything about this community. And so how do we leverage those expertise to come out with a full solution? And Sid, I did see you muted. Do you want to
Yeah, I was going to say I fully agree with like that point. I think that people are obsessed with being the person who brings the solution instead of the supporting character in bringing that solution about. And especially in those things, people need to understand that like you're not centered in the conversation, so you need to understand what that role looks like. It's one thing to say that you're an activist and you're all about these changes, but it's another thing that you take away from those people who are already doing the work and who are directly impacted on it. Understand that there's like a how their first primary sources, secondary sources. You're not that first that primary line of defense. You're maybe secondary, tertiary, and you need to understand that's where it is. And how can we support you? That should be the question, not what can we do? How can we support you? Yeah, fully resonates with that. Yeah. So you kind of organically grew from one thing to the other. How was it breaking into the scene?
So that is also, that's a good question. I think I broke into the scene at the point of a crisis. So Hurricane Sandy was the moment that I started fully immersing myself in this work. It came out of, in the area that my parents were living at the time in Staten Island, there were a lot of immigrant population, specifically Caribbeans, that did not speak the language or did not feel comfortable in having conversations with FEMA and having conversations with the Red Cross about the structural integrity of their home. And so me with a couple of other colleagues who spoke different languages just started translating. We're like, okay, here's the issues that you're having in your home. Here's what you need to do. This structural bearing is incorrect. This is how you have to modify. These are the mechanical systems you're going to have to. And it was just an automatic reaction because I was so frustrated that my parents, who are Caribbean in nature, have a very, my parents are very like, we need to figure this out. I can't believe this happened. And I'm like, okay, but they're not understanding you. So let's try to have this conversation in a way that makes everybody understand. And it was a little shocking to me that the folks that worked at FEMA and the engineering firms didn't understand my parents. And I said to myself, wait, let me take a moment back. And it's exactly that. They're a second party and third party. They're experts in engineering, they're expert in design, but they had no idea how to engage community or the culture component. And so that breakdown of communication, which is so important, communication is like so key for the success of climate action and climate mobilization that people often ignore. That I and a couple of our colleagues just like interjected ourselves. They're like, no, this is how you have to do this. This is how you should move forward. And I started getting more involved in like public conversations on program changes and like, why is the application only in English? It should be in English, it should be in patois, like it should be in Spanish, like, and not only the application, which is just the front page document, the whole process. So the person processing the application, the engineer that connects to your contractor, because if you only translate one piece, it's problematic. It's just, you know, a token, and it's not taking part of the whole life cycle. So my recommendation is not to wait for a crisis to happen to get involved, but to really look at opportunities in the market where people are asking for feedback, like what's wrong with this solar program, what's wrong with this heat pump program, how can it be better, how can you engage and make it a successful adoption across different generations, across different cultures, different ethnicities, different communities, and really understanding what are pieces that you control, that you know the implementer can control and mobilize. New York City is one of the most diverse cities in the country, and for us to not have a process on disaster recovery was unacceptable at that time. And so my recommendation though is like look at those pivotal moments. You're here, you know, at the Passive House Network, you're listening. Reach out to Ken, you know, email him like, hey Ken, you know, what are the opportunities to get more involved? And I also acknowledge that the other layer of this is that if you come from low income communities, there's this huge tension between like volunteering and interning, and you need a job. You
Yeah.
need a job to pay for rent. You need a job to pay for food. And so be very explicit with opportunity and saying, hey, I'm interested in internship, but I need to have, you know, I need to understand if your internship has a paid opportunity. We're not doing unpaid work. There's this advocate who has been advocating for interns to get paid because some people don't pay for internships. It is absolutely absurd. And so you can look at NYSERDA's Clean Energy Internship Program. They have a list of employers that will pay for internships. You can look at other programs like the Eat It program, the Clean program, that can help you kind of navigate it in the entry level, in that entry level space of engagement. If you're looking to do a mid-level career change or a senior level position, reach out to folks. I had no shame when I was younger. I'd be like, hey, you know, you're doing this. I want to learn more. The worst thing that people can do is say, you know, no, I have no time. Okay, then that's fine. I can learn by somewhere else. So that's kind of my recommendation for folks. Don't wait for a crisis, but if a crisis happens, definitely act on it.
Totally agree. Let's see. I had a question while you were talking about you kind of went into it with like there we go. The money of it. On the opposite hand, yes, only look for things that are going to give you back something, obviously, because of that's what you need. I do think that it's a shame that companies will expect for people, especially students, to do free labor under the guise of you're getting some credits or you're gaining experience. That you're not actually being intentional about aiding the community because you still want free labor off of the back of that community. It literally goes opposite direction of what the intent was. And I guess, yeah, it's still, if we had people present in the room that understood the fact that it's multi-layered and you can't just say one thing and just do one thing, it has to be in everything that you do and all that you say, it maybe we'll have a different, we'll be having a different conversation. But yeah, reverting back to how can we support you and doing the 360, not just that little view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I always tell folks, because when I first started working in sustainability, I had the opportunity to intern at the UN. And I remember thinking, oh my God, the UN, oh, I'm so amazed. And they're like, yeah, it's unpaid. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, like what is going on here? And this is, you know, we want you to do this greenhouse gas calculation for the headquarters. And I just sat there thinking, unpaid work, like I have rent, I have student loans, I have food, like I was struggling, you know, I was on food stamps and I was on Medicare and I lived in public housing and I was going to school full time and I was stressed. And so there's larger institutions that, you know, if they're publicly traded, if they have over 1,000 employees or 500 employees, you know, using I think the U.S. Definition, the federal definition for small business is 300 employees or above. Like if they have that, then they can have the capacity to pay volunteers and pay students. I know a lot of smaller organizations that are volunteer led, they don't have reserves. So that makes sense. But again, if you don't have the fiscal, again, there's that tension of the reality of life. And if you can't do that, then definitely focus your efforts on paid opportunities.
Right. Yeah, fully agree. Okay, let's see. Oh, you sent the.
You know what, Daphne? That's it it makes me think about a lot of the work that you're doing that's tied to the community and policy work, and moving from being a researcher in a lot of respects to being a partner with the community. And can you talk about your policy work that you've done and how
Yeah,
you
so
address the community, or
yeah, so
ways to address the community?
I can talk about there's kind of some work that we've done in the solar space that came out of like community concern. So a couple of years ago, one of our partners came to us and said, we have this residential homeowner that had solar installed. It was installed incorrectly. They were getting fines from the Department of Building. And they're going to have to foreclose their home because they need to refinance and they can't because the solar company put a lien on their property. This was a monolingual homeowner, immigrant community in the Bronx. And we were shocked. We were like, oh my gosh, we don't want you to have such a bad experience with solar. Let's talk about it. Let's understand like what the issues were. Let's try to devise like a pathway forward. And so when we talked to the homeowner, we found out that the solar company did not translate the power purchasing agreement that was developed, and they put a lien on their home. And then the power purchasing agreement also had a availability to sell the loan to another lender that had variable interest rates. So it was completely predatory. There was no consumer protections. And so we went through the chains and we worked with consumer protections. We worked with the state energy agency, and we said, okay, here's a pathway forward. Here's the issues that the contractor did that were negligent. Here's how we can solve the solar issue. Here's the actual benefits that she can take on if she wants to continue on solar. And if she doesn't, here's some other programs that we can do to support. And this was a lengthy kind of 6-month process with one homeowner and our partner over in Queens that does housing justice work. So from this, we had a conversation with our partner and they said, you know, our community is really interested in solar, but we're concerned because we've seen these predatory practices where contractors are knocking on doors, telling people to get solar very quickly, sending power purchase agreements 0% down, and no one's regulating it. And no one really knows how to actually assess for solar. So we said, that's a very good concern. And that's a very good point. You know, the state is really wanting to mobilize solar, but how do we do it in a way that is community driven, right? And that a way that's not predatory to Black and brown households, immigrant households, and low-income homeowners. So we came up with we sat down with the partners. We asked them, what are they working on? How do they help homeowners? And a lot of these homeowners were community folks that were not able to purchase a home in the past. They were using the HUD first-time homeowner program, which came out of the Fair Housing Act, right? So HUD discriminating, the federal government discriminating against Black and brown folks, created the Fair Housing Act, which said, oh, we didn't realize we weren't providing mortgages to Black and brown folks. So here's a first-time homeowner program. And so these organizations were actively supporting people go through that program. And they said it would be great to help and understand, like, what is solar? How does it work? What is a good roof? What is a bad roof? So we talked to NYSERDA, and then from the recommendation on the policy side is like, how do we ensure consumer protections? How do we ensure communities have access to like clean energy that is not being sold by a third party, but it is being educated, and the decision can happen from community. So from that, we came up with a program called Electrify NYC. And so what Electrify NYC is that it's an open source program, meaning it educates nonprofits in Queens and in Staten Island on like, what the heck is solar? And how does different solar financing products work? How do they interact with people's taxes? What is the value of the different types of modules, the different types of connections, the different types of financing, and what makes the most sense for whichever homeowner you're talking to? And then what's the next step if they decide to do that? So education, right? Unlocking that education that normally it's only through the contractor's lens, having a lot of housing justice organizations have that resource enables the community to become more empowered with those decisions and become educated decision makers and not predated on. And so the next step of this, and I'm happy to say we've had a couple of homeowners actually install solar and use a 0% interest forgivable loan, which is a grant that the reason why it's structured as a loan is to commit that the homeowner is not going to convert their home to market rate and that it actually stays affordable for the next 10 years. And so through this project, we have continued to advocate for consumer protections, right? What does consumer protections look like as the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, deploys more funding for solar in residential homes? How do we ensure that, yes, we're doing a clean energy transition, but it's not financially burdensome on the backs of Americans and of immigrants living in these communities that are going to get that can experience predatory practices from contractors, from these large contractors that all they see is, yes, we've deployed, megawatts and gigawatts of solar, but at the cost of what? So that's kind of one example of a project that we've worked on that we're not even thinking about, but it came out of our community partners that were like, hey, this is happening and we would like to fix this. And we're like, absolutely, let us know how we can support you.
Daphne, you make it seem so easy, right? Now, dealing with municipalities is difficult as it is. And when you're pushing initiatives that's catered towards marginalized communities, there's a lot of difficulties there, right? In particularly when you think about value and costs, it's not viewed the same. And I want you to speak to the difficulties, the pushback, right? The the setbacks that you experience in this space.
Yeah, so you're right. I'm making it sound easy, but it's a lot of, for those that know me, I always joke around and say I'm a bunch of like little balls of anger. I'm like 4'11", always angry in every single call. So I sound very nice and pleasant to y'all now, but if you're ever on one of my work calls, I'm like, well, what is this? It's unacceptable. These communities have suffered enough. And so part of this is just being honest. A lot of municipalities and a lot of government entities, they're like, we want to solve climate change. We want to be equitable. We have this beautiful marketing paper. We're like, okay, that's cute, but what does it actually mean in policy and program and in money? There is this quote, and I don't remember who said it, but it's like, people are all about like social justice and civil rights when it comes to like policy and initiatives, but when it comes to money, people are very hesitant for change, and they're resistant. And time again, we see this resistance, right? Yes, we want to move forward in an equitable manner, but how much is it going to cost us? What's the cost effectiveness of it? And cost effectiveness is always designed in a therms and kilowatt basis and a mobilization through an energy modeling and analysis. And it often forgets about the historical disinvestment, and it often forgets that in a race, not everybody's starting at the start line. Some people don't even have shoes. Like, some people don't even know where the race is at. And so when we talk to municipalities and governments and utilities, we reframe the conversation of like, yes, we understand there's this, ambitious MMBTU goal that you have to hit, an ambitious kilowatt goal, an ambitious deployment goal. But if you deploy it in the fastest scalable, like fastest, most scalable solution, you're going to have unintended consequences, and it will happen. Like, it's not, it may happen, it will happen. And so what is your role to mitigate and prevent this from spreading as fast as possible? And so we know that we're working against, large corporations on both sides. On the oil and gas side, they want to keep the status quo. On the renewable side, they want to deploy renewables as quickly as possible because it's all about the money. And so our job is to advocate and expand the information as we're expanding it to you all of like, hey, status quo, like, calm down. New tech, calm down. Like, how do you make sure that this stuff is intentionally working in the right way for communities to not be financially burdened? And how do you support generational wealth growth in these communities, right? You're not adding on, heat, and we advocate for heat pumps and we do heat pump work, but how do you make sure that you're not putting in the 0% interest down heat pump that's not regulated by the Public Service Commission, and then they're able to change the rates at whatever rate they want, and then these families are financially burdened, and then they are displaced and those communities are gentrified, right? We're going to have the same issue regardless of what the technology is, because technology is not what's going to save us. It's not. We're just transitioning from one system to another system. So how do we do that transition in a way that is humane, right? And in a way that is mindful of the communities, the cultures, and the experience. And then we have people that will say, yeah, we don't really care about that. We care about this goal, because if we don't get this goal, we're not going to hit our profit margins. And then we'll say, well, then thank you for your time. I don't think we're the right partners. And I think we'll wish you all the best. And it happens. We've walked away from certain projects that we felt like are not intentional about that equitable engagement. They just want to market themselves as equitable. And it's something we've seen a lot more since 2020.
You bring up a good point, right? A constant theme that comes up in these conversations is intentionality, right? Making sure that the work that you're doing is intentional and the partners that you're taking on, their goals also align with yours. What I like what you just said was that you walked away from certain partners, certain situations that wasn't goal orientated with yours, right? So there's always an option, right? And I think that's one thing that people have to understand, that you're not boxed in, right? You do have a choice. You can move in a direction where it's beneficial for the community and your organization, company, right? And you don't necessarily have to accept.
Yes.
You don't have to accept what doesn't align, what's not, I think there's a lot of setbacks in this field because people tend to take on projects that doesn't align. We're giving them an option is what I'm trying to say, right? We're giving them an option to do worse.
I think that something needs to be said too about the fact that sometimes people don't have the privilege to say no. If you're just starting out, like, I don't know, talk to any young professional. I'm just looking for a job. I'm looking for anything, because it has to happen right now. Like you said countless times, the bills needed to be paid now. At that time, I'm sure you weren't very like, you still knew what you wanted to do, but you knew what it would take for you to be able to do what you want to do. And sometimes we're in those areas. So it's like, for those people too who are like, you're trying, the little things do matter. And that was going to lead into like the next question I was going to ask. What are those little things that you can do? Those little changes that don't take you so far away from what you're able to do right now, that still would make an impact.
Yeah, so to answer both of your questions, and this will be the last question I take on, as an organization, we have that privilege, as Sid mentioned, that we can say, no, we're not going to take on this project because it's not done in an equitable way. As an early professional, I was looking very deeply at like, who is it that I was applying for? What is their mission? What are the reviews that they have? What are the projects that they take? Like, it as a recovering engineer, like I look at engineering firms and say, wait a minute, their projects that they're highlighting is a prison. I'm not applying to that. Like, I don't want an engineering firm that their shining project is as a prison, a private for-profit prison, which is very problematic. But if there's another firm that focused on like community centers, or they focus on affordable housing, and then I knew that there were certain issues that were problematic, I would apply and say, here's a space that I can apply for, and I feel confident in like advocating and vocalizing change. Although they might not take my change today, there might be other people in the future that will apply and take on jobs and help shift that narrative, because they say, wait a minute, Sid mentioned this before, and Daphne mentioned this before, and Ed mentioned this before. It's all about that interconnection. And then lastly, connecting with others. One of the things that was incredibly valuable in this space is that there's people that I've met with 10 years ago that I'm still very close to in this like work environment, and they have been very, very helpful, and it's been tremendous. And I live in these areas, so to me, the reason why I put so much emphasis on like what do I take versus what I not take is because at the end of the day, I'm gonna have my grandmother in my ear being like, why is there these light bulbs in my hallway? And I'm gonna have to report for it. So that helps me like decide like, okay, is it something that I want my ear chopped off about when I get home or not? And it helps me figure out like what I'd like to do.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I'm gonna, Eddie, sorry, I'm gonna jump in here because I know Daphne, and I apologize. I had meant to say up front that we needed to pull up short here today because of last minute scheduling issues. And so I want to thank Daphne very much for your time today and great insights. And I think the last just of many points, but of connecting and making sure that we are leveraging those connections and finding those moments. To Sid and to Eddie, and Eddie will work on your video going forward. But all good. This is a great talk. I thank everyone for coming and your time today. And we hope to see you at the next DEI session, which will be in July. So have a great day. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.